Many examples of leisure, certainly of physical recreation and sport, require some kind of provision. Let's put this word up here. They require some kind of provision, or they require some kind of facility. It might be to do with coaching, it might be to do with equipment, but lots of things require these things. And what I want to do within this particular tutorial is kind of reveal the differences between public, private, and voluntary formats of that provision, that facility. So with that in mind, let's make a start. Over here, let's immediately talk about public provision. And by the way, these images are not meant to be one or the other. We could use them for various kinds. They're kind of, obviously if it's static 2D images, we could interpret them in different ways. But the first thing to say about kind of our public facilities, okay? So the first thing to say about our public facilities is that they are funded and controlled by some kind of government. Funded and controlled by government. Now, it sounds very serious when I kind of say it that way. By the way, I'm choosing to write government with a small g there. Now, just be aware we're very likely to be talking about some kind of local government or local council that's achieving that. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily need to be a national government. But that's ultimately what defines public provision. Secondly, guys, we could say that this provision is non-profit making. Now, this is actually an interesting sort of concept. That's meant to be an F, profit making. Now, this is actually an interesting concept because a lot of local authority provision has actually been handed over to profit making sort of organisations that go to tender for that provision. And it's been done in a couple of different formats in the past. One of them was called best value, for example. I'm not going to get into it here. But actually, there is a bit of this that now gets involved and we'll come back to in a second. But ultimately, the facility and the provision is there for public use. Now, that doesn't mean it's free necessarily, but it's there as open public access. And because it's not profit making, it means that fees are managed sensibly, one would hope. Now, finally, guys, examples of this, we might be talking about thinking your own area. This is likely to be the case. They want to have some kind of leisure centres, swimming pools. That's why I put the one I've got over there. I mean, we've got a sort of a private swimming lesson going on there, but maybe the pool itself is publicly owned. We're talking about things like parks. Don't forget that green spaces and parks would be included here. We could be talking about things like outdoor pitches, which, again, may well involve fees and hiring and all these sorts of things, but they are publicly owned. And we could be talking about things like playgrounds. I also thought about things like skate parks as examples of this. If you wanted to have a couple of more, these would be good examples in here. So that's what we mean by public. And again, I'm just sort of saying here, look, we've got a swimming pool. Maybe this is within a leisure centre. Who knows, okay? Now, I also want to talk to you about almost the antithesis or the opposite, and that is private, okay? And with private, the key principles, let me do my thing there. With private, what we're talking about here is that the objective of the provision is profit. So these are for-profit organisations, so it's important to stress that. They are owned by, who do you think I'm going to write down here? Individuals, or more likely, let me just go over a little bit, individuals or companies. Okay, so companies, the private sector owns these provisions. Now, maybe this is a private health club and it's owned by a health company, for example, that's running for profit. We can clearly say there is no government involvement. I mean, that doesn't mean it's outside the law, of course. These organisations, they still need to follow rules about employment law and rules about health and safety, of course, naturally. But there's no government involvement in the running of these. And a great example, that's the reason I put this image here, a great example of this would be something like a private gym. Okay, now that's not the only example, but it's a good one, all right? So, private gyms. Great example. Now let's finish this off by looking at our third group. And I'm going to hazard a guess, and I very much could be wrong, but this might be the one that you've come into contact with most, because in sport and physical recreation, the voluntary sector is very, very significant. So what do we mean by the voluntary sector? Well, it shares something with the public sector in that it's non-profit. Okay, so it's not for profit making, but it is funded by what would be referred to as fundraising fundraising and membership. Now, I'm wondering how many of you who are taking part in this tutorial, maybe you're part of a sports club, a football club, say, or a gymnastics club, and you are paying some kind of subs or fees to take part in training, take part in matches and competitions. This would be a great example. Maybe you do fundraising events in the evenings. Maybe, there's kind of social events that do this. Now, we can say here there is no government. This is a nice sentence, actually. See if you can get this down exactly, guys, okay? No government, nor, this is a nice word to use in your writing, if you're going to say not of two things, nor business involvement, okay? Nor business involvement, okay? So this is not run by a government or a local government, local council, and it's not run by a business. It's run by the members and the clubs themselves. And these clubs are often charities. Okay, not always, but they are often charities, and therefore, obviously, they can receive donations. But perhaps most critically, and from the name, it's fairly obvious, but they are run by volunteers. Now, I'm going to give you one example from my own life. I happen to be, as I record this at least hopefully I still am, but I happen to be right now club secretary of a sports club. And it is a football club, sports clubs or groups. And it is a football club, and I take on the role of club secretary, and I probably do between 6 and 8 hours work a week each week, and that is completely voluntary. I don't make anything from it. There's no money involved. I do it because I believe that this club and this group is positive for the community, and I believe that's a contribution that I can make, and of course I also enjoy doing it, and that's why I do it. But to finish this off, it's quite easy to think about these sectors and think, here, money comes from one place, government, and some fees. Here, investment comes from the private organisation, and they put on private provision. But don't forget that this one here is the beating heart of sport and physical recreation within our community and within our society. And one of the things I would be willing to encourage, I never like to try and tell teenagers what they should do with their lives or how you should live your life. You've got to make that decision for yourself. But one of the things I would encourage you to at least to consider is that volunteering, and especially within your own community, volunteering is a beautiful and magnificent thing to do. And if you can enjoy it at the same time, you're giving something back to a community that's given, hopefully at least, maybe has or hasn't, is given something to you, and you can contribute something back. And I believe that volunteering is one of the highest behaviours in our society, and therefore I encourage you to at least consider it.